Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Life Reset Collective. My name is Josh. And today we're talking about the fear that your past will repeat itself. Okay, this is a channel for people who are either going through a life reset or have done so or are getting ready to do so. It's not easy to do, and not very many people understand it, which is why I made this channel to help basically empower those who are going through that process. Sometimes life reset can be brought on by divorce or by losing a job or by losing a home, anything that is basically characterized by a great disaster followed by a rebuilding period could be classified as a life reset. And I've been through two in my life, and so that's why I made this channel, to help people who have been through it also. Today, I want to talk about this topic that, sometimes we are afraid that the past will repeat itself. Sometimes we're afraid that if we continue moving into the future, that the things that happened to us in the past will resurface again, that we'll experience the same kind of hurt, that we'll experience the same kind of disaster. This is, I think, a very reasonable fear. It can cause a lot of anxiety and worry, and it can make us afraid of the future. It can sometimes cause us to not move forward, even when we could otherwise move forward. And I personally deal with this a lot. I feel like I am constantly worried that my past problems will resurface. And there's also an element of, I guess, we get a bit traumatized by things that go on in the past, and then it can be hard to let go of those things and to not sort of project those onto future situations. So I've got some stuff written down here, a bit of a blog I'm going to read to you about this, okay? What science says about the fear that your past will repeat itself. When something painful, frightening, humiliating, or destabilizing happens, the brain learns from it. It remembers the event, but it can also connect fear to people, places, circumstances, and physical sensations. It can also connect to warning signs surrounding that event. Later, anything that resembles these conditions can trigger anxiety, even when the current situation is different. Researchers call this fear generalization. Okay, it means that fear learned in one situation can begin spreading into other situations. A person may start reacting not only to actual danger, but also to anything that feels similar to what happened before. This is why you may understand logically that your life has changed while still feeling afraid that everything is about to happen again. Anxiety does not require an immediate threat. It can be triggered by a memory, a possibility, or a prediction about the future. The fear can feel completely real even when the event you fear is not currently happening. This is also why telling yourself to stop worrying often doesn't work. Anxiety involves thoughts, emotions, physical sensations, learned reactions, and behavior. It usually takes more than one reassuring thought to change it. The hopeful part is that fear can be reduced through new learning. The goal is not necessarily to erase the memory or convince yourself that nothing bad will ever happen. The goal is to repeatedly experience evidence that the present is not always the same as the past. Okay. So, in other words, you begin learning to basically tell yourself this situation may feel familiar to the situation that happened before, where this bad thing happened, but that does not mean it's going to end the same way. Okay. In other words, you want to separate the past from the present. Right. When anxiety begins, you ask yourself, what is actually happening right now? Right. Then ask, what am I remembering, imagining, or predicting? So those are not always the same thing. You can tell yourself, I'm remembering something painful. I'm predicting that this thing will happen again. Or I feel afraid, but fear is not proof that I'm currently in danger. That, in other words, the thing from your past, that happened before, the thing we're afraid of having happen again. But this is happening now, right? So separating those two can be very useful. This does not mean that you want to dismiss legitimate warning signs of a possible re-emergence of a bad thing. It means examining the present situation based on current evidence instead of automatically assuming that the past is returning. Now, anxiety is not only mental, right? It affects breathing, heart rate, muscles, digestion, concentration, and even attention. When the body becomes highly activated, it becomes more difficult to think clearly. That is why grounding techniques can help, right? So you can slow your breathing, you can feel your feet against the floor, you can notice what you can see, hear, and physically feel. Look around and identify where you are. Remind yourself of the date, your location, and what is actually happening. The purpose is not to force the anxiety to disappear right away. The purpose is to reduce the physical intensity enough to make a thoughtful decision about it. Okay. And now here's another note is be careful with avoidance. Avoidance often reduces anxiety just in the moment, right? You avoid the conversation, the relationship, the opportunity, the place, the decision, or the feeling, and you experience some relief. You think, well, I stopped so and so from happening again, right? But long term avoidance can actually strengthen fear. You never receive the opportunity to learn that you might have handled the situation differently and safely, or that the feared outcome might not have happened, right? So, in other words, we can kind of create a cycle where, yeah, we are afraid of a thing happening again in our life, but then we push things away, we hide from them. And then we think, oh, yeah, I'm keeping that from happening. But we might actually not be keeping it from happening so much as we're just keeping maybe a lot of other things from happening, like good things potentially, right? And then we just keep running from it. But this also tends to kind of like not resolve the issue because we keep thinking that the past is going to happen anyway, and then our pushing away of things and people sort of reinforces it. And we don't learn that we're capable of overcoming it. We don't learn that it may not happen again, right? And thus we just live and we continue to perpetuate in that anxiety. This is one reason for why gradual exposure is commonly used in anxiety treatment. Gradual exposure means safely and intentionally approaching situations, memories, or sensations that have become associated with fear. It is done in manageable steps rather than through overwhelming or reckless action. It does not mean ignoring danger or tolerating abuse. It does not mean forcing yourself into harmful situations, of course. It just means creating safe opportunities to discover that anxiety can rise and fall without the feared outcome actually happening. Okay. You can also turn worry into action. Worry can feel productive because it keeps you mentally focused on the threat, but repeatedly imagining a disaster is not always the same as preparing for it, right? Ask yourself, is there a reasonable action I can take right now? When a certain set of events begins to, take place and you begin to be afraid, like, oh no, this is happening again. This happened in my past, now it's going to happen again. You might want to take some reasonable action, but we shouldn't always just assume that past thing is going to happen today, right? So some reasonable actions we can actually take might be to, set a boundary, save money, gather information, ask for help, leave that unhealthy situation, document the problem, have that difficult conversation, right? Take useful action. Then identify when planning has become repetitive fear, okay? You can say, okay, I've considered the risk. I have taken the action that is available to me, but now continuing to replay this outcome is not helping me to prepare. When I was younger, I one time said to somebody, if I'm not worrying about this potential problem, whatever it is, right, then it's almost like you're being irresponsible about it. Like you're going to probably let it happen. But this was my anxiety, my fear, basically letting me be controlled by the possibility of that situation happening. I was just living in that all the time, right? Instead of just taking an action, an action or two or three reasonable actions I could take to maybe keep the bad thing from happening, and then saying, okay, I made those decisions, I took those actions, I did what I could, right? So that was the responsible thing to do, right? But letting the anxiety just swim around in our body, this is not, something that's going to help for sure. Especially in the case of projecting past experiences onto our future. You can also collect evidence that you have changed as a person. The fear that your past will repeat itself often includes the belief that you will be just as powerless as you felt before. But you may not be the same person that you were when it happened before. You may recognize warning signs sooner. You may have better boundaries. You may be more willing to leave. You may have more experience, support, knowledge, or options, okay? In fact, you can reinforce this by writing down some things. Write down moments when you did recognize a problem earlier. You handled something differently. You did protect yourself. You asked for help. You survived uncertainty. You experienced a familiar situation that ended differently. You faced something difficult and managed it. Confidence does not have to mean believing that nothing bad will ever happen again. Confidence can mean knowing that you are better prepared to respond when a bad thing happens. And that's like building trust in yourself, right? And this is actually essential. You can tell yourself, I know more than I did that. I have better choices now. I can respond differently now. even if something difficult happens, I'm not automatically powerless now, right? The goal is not complete certainty, of course. The goal is learning to evaluate the present clearly, tolerate uncertainty, take reasonable precautions, and continue living your life. Your past can give you information without controlling every decision you make, right? When anxiety becomes persistent, causes panic attacks, interferes with sleep, damages relationships, or prevents you from functioning normally, then it might be time to actually talk to somebody, talk to a therapist, a psychologist, something like that, right? Anxiety and trauma related symptoms are treatable, and evidence based therapies can help reduce them. Okay. What happened to you may explain why you feel this way, but it does not mean that you are destined to keep living this way or to keep experiencing what happened to you in the past. I think this is a very difficult topic. I think that this is a topic that has affected me a great deal in my life. There are many situations I've had in the past where I'm just always afraid they're going to come back and replay themselves out. And I think that as I go down this road of resetting my life, I learn better that projecting those things onto the future does not help. Learning the lessons from the hard situations in the past is good, and taking appropriate action is good. But letting yourself worry too much is not good. Letting yourself just fixate on those things is not good. And then, looking at every situation and saying, oh, that's going to happen again. It's kind of like the old saying goes, like, when you're a hammer, everything you see is going to look like a nail. And we don't want to become that way. So there you go. There are some thoughts today that I kind of gathered, some sort of science backed things that we might be able to do to help this be better, and to not see an entire future built of the same problems that we experienced in the past. Drop a comment. Let me know what you think about this. Let me know if you sometimes fear that your past will repeat itself. And if that causes you to worry, I would love to hear about this. I try to respond to every comment. Thank you so much for coming back to another episode of the Life Reset Collective, empowering those who are going through a life reset with practical steps, encouragement, support, and basically just motivation, letting you know that you can do it and that you do deserve another life at the other side of this hard climb that you're in. So don't give up, friends. We're in it together. Let's make it happen. I'll see you awesome people on the next one.